Somewhere in your life right now, there is a person who can change your mood with one sentence. You haven't spoken to them today, maybe not this week, but if they messaged you right now, something in your chest would shift before you even read the words. Sit with that for a second. A person you may not even like still has a switch inside you, and they don't have to be in the room to flip it. That isn't affection. That isn't connection. That's access. And somewhere, without ever agreeing to it out loud, you handed it to them. Here's the part that should actually bother you. They know it. Not because they're clever, but because you keep proving it. Every fast reply, every late-night rereading of the same message, every time your face changes when their name appears on a screen. And the moment you stop sending that proof, something in the entire dynamic breaks. Almost nobody names the actual mechanism correctly. It isn't the insult that hooks you. It isn't even the silence that follows it. It's the not knowing. A mind that can never predict when the next reaction, message, or flicker of attention is coming will chase it far harder than a mind that gets an answer every single day. And that one pattern explains more of your restless nights than you'd probably like to admit. 4 seconds, 20 minutes. Picture the ordinary version of this. A coworker makes a comment in a meeting, just sharp enough to make you look smaller in front of everyone. Your hands get warm, your jaw tightens. You're already composing the comeback before they've finished the sentence. By the time you actually respond, you're not answering their comment anymore. You're defending an entire version of yourself that nobody attacked in the first place. That's the trick almost no one catches in real time. The provocation lasted 4 seconds. The performance you gave in response lasted the rest of the meeting and quite possibly the rest of your evening. There's an old distinction that gets repeated so often, it's easy to stop hearing it, but it holds up under pressure. Some things are entirely yours to govern. Some things never were. Their tone, their timing, their intention, never yours. Your face, your voice, your next sentence, always yours. Most people cross that line so fast they never notice they crossed it. The comment happens, the reaction happens, and somewhere in between, a choice quietly disappears without anyone deciding to give it away. It shows up outside meetings too. Someone leaves your message on read for 2 days, then replies with something short and vague. You spend the gap between sending and receiving rehearsing a dozen different versions of what their silence might mean. And by the time the reply finally arrives, you've already lived through an argument that never actually happened. The event took seconds. You gave it 20 minutes, sometimes 20 hours. That is the first thing you need to understand about not reacting. You're not giving up power. You're stopping the unnecessary transfer of it. Your anger is their paycheck. Now follow that coworker's comment a little further. What did it actually cost them? 4 seconds and 1 sentence. What did it cost you? An afternoon of replaying it, rehearsing what you should have said, deciding whether to bring it up again tomorrow. That imbalance is the entire point of provocation. It was never really about the topic. It was a quiet test of whether your attention could still be borrowed for free. People who study manipulative dynamics have a blunt way of putting it. Your reaction is currency. Anger pays out. Tears pay out. Even a furious, brilliantly argued defense pays out, because all of it proves the same thing, that this person still has a hand on your emotional dial. Withholding that payout isn't cold. It's simply refusing to fund something that was never going to end on its own. And sometimes the person doing this to you isn't a stranger. They may not even consciously mean harm. Sometimes they've simply never been told no in this particular currency before. They've learned that a certain comment produces a certain reaction, so they keep pressing the same button, and this is where the next problem begins. Because once a reaction becomes predictable, it becomes something the mind can start chasing. That particular currency is addictive to collect, and it isn't always about cruelty. Uncertainty is a drug. A message that arrives every day at the exact same hour barely registers. One that arrives at random, sometimes warm and sometimes distant, can occupy your mind for a week. Consistency is boring to the nervous system. Unpredictability never is. It's the same mechanism that keeps someone checking a slot machine, refreshing a notification screen, or replaying a conversation that ended without closure. The mind isn't simply chasing the reward. It's chasing the not knowing when the reward might come again. Apply that to a person who calmly, suddenly, stops reacting the way they used to. The old pattern always promised a payout, an explanation, an apology, a flash of jealousy, something. Now there's nothing left to predict, and a mind that can't predict something will circle back to it far longer than a mind that already got its answer. But this is where people make a dangerous mistake. They learn that calm silence can create uncertainty, and they start using it as a weapon. They delay replies on purpose. They disappear to make someone wonder. They withhold affection to manufacture anxiety. That isn't Stoicism. That's manipulation wearing a calm face. The moment you use composure to manufacture a psychological effect in someone else, you've built another form of dependence. You're still watching, still measuring, still waiting for a reaction. You haven't escaped the game. You've simply changed your move. Unfinished stories keep people awake longer than finished ones for the same reason. A cliffhanger works on the same wiring as a relationship that ends without a real conversation. The mind treats an open loop as unfinished work. And unfinished work gets replayed until something closes it. Calm, honest silence doesn't create that loop as a strategy. It simply refuses to hand someone closure on demand. And that distinction matters, because there is a difference between not reacting and performing not reacting. Composure is not the same as suppression. There's a version of this that fails almost immediately. Someone learns that not reacting looks powerful, so they start performing stillness. A flat voice, delayed replies, a carefully arranged indifference. Underneath, they're checking their phone every 4 minutes. That isn't composure. That's a louder kind of reacting, just rerouted so nobody else can see it happening. Real stillness doesn't need an audience to confirm that it worked. Marcus Aurelius lived inside a world that constantly gave him reasons to react. Pressure, betrayal, political conflict, war, exhaustion. Yet the question he kept returning to was quieter than most people expect from an emperor. What actually belongs to my judgment? And what doesn't? Not, how do I look calm? Not, how do I make them regret it? Not, how do I win this? Just, where does my responsibility actually start and end? That test cuts both ways, though, because sometimes the thing you're supposedly staying composed about isn't manipulation at all. Sometimes it's a comment that landed because there was a grain of truth buried inside it, and that's an entirely different problem to solve. Suppression needs the other person to notice you're unaffected. Composure doesn't need them to notice anything at all. Not every sting is manufactured. Notice the next time something a friend, a partner, or a stranger says keeps replaying uninvited. Ask what specifically stuck. Not the whole sentence. The one exact phrase that wouldn't leave you alone. Usually it isn't the cruelest part. It's the part that sits closest to something you've already half suspected about yourself and haven't looked at directly yet. That distinction changes what silence is actually for. Silence used to avoid a hard truth is just delay wearing a calm expression. Silence used to examine that truth honestly before reacting from either shame or denial is closer to what the Stoics meant by discipline of judgment. Seneca spent years doing something like this in his letters, catching a first impression, turning it over, and refusing to act on it until he'd checked what was actually his to own in it. Not performance, a private habit of double-checking a feeling before handing it the steering wheel. That is the habit worth borrowing, not never feel stung. But before I decide what this feeling means, do I know that it is actually about them? Or is it quietly about something I've been avoiding? That question takes us somewhere deeper, because sometimes the person in front of you isn't controlling your reaction. Your own story is event versus story. Somebody doesn't wave back in the hallway. That's the entire event. It lasted under a second and cost nothing. Then the mind gets involved. Maybe they're annoyed with you. Maybe they're talking about you to someone else. Maybe this confirms something you already feared about how people really see you. None of that happened in the hallway. All of it happened afterward, in a space nobody else can see. By evening, you're not reacting to a missed wave anymore. You're reacting to an entire narrative your own mind constructed and then quietly started believing. This is where a pause actually earns its keep. Not a performative pause meant to look wise. Just enough space to ask one honest question before the story hardens into fact. What actually happened, separate from what I've decided it means? Most of the time, the honest answer is smaller, plainer, and far less personal than the version that had already taken over your evening. And once you learn to separate the event from the story, something else becomes visible. You start noticing which people have learned to depend on the old version of you. Testing what they cannot move. People test what they know can move. An ex who goes quiet for months and then reappears with one carefully casual message usually isn't testing whether you're free on Friday. They're testing whether the door still swings the way it used to. If it swings, if you reply too fast, explain too much, get angry in exactly the old pattern, they've learned the door still works. If it doesn't swing, something in the entire script changes. Not because you're playing hard to get, because the old access is gone. This is uncomfortable because some of the people closest to you may have been quietly relying on your predictability, not maliciously. The same way anyone relies on a light switch working the same way every time they flip it. The moment the switch stops behaving the way they expect, most people don't walk away immediately. First, they push harder, a sharper comment, a colder silence. One more attempt to find the old wiring underneath the new one. That escalation isn't automatically proof you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's simply the old system searching for its familiar outcome and quietly failing to find it. And when that happens, you may discover something painful. Some people weren't attached to your presence as much as they were attached to your predictability. People miss control, not you. Here's the part that can quietly break your heart if you're not ready for it. Sometimes when you stop reacting, a relationship doesn't get better. It gets strange. A friendship that ran for years on you apologizing first. A family pattern that depended on you absorbing blame so everyone else could feel comfortable. A version of you that was easier to move, easier to guilt, easier to predict than the one standing here now. Take that version away, and some people don't say they're proud of you. They say you've changed, and it rarely sounds like a compliment when they say it. That sentence can feel like rejection. But consider the harder possibility. What if it was never really you they were attached to, but the reliable reaction they could get out of you on command? Much of what gets called loyalty is really familiarity with a role someone has quietly agreed to keep playing. Losing that role can look from their side like losing you entirely. It usually isn't. It's losing the version of you that made things easy for everyone except yourself. And once you see that, you start noticing where your attention has been going long after the interaction itself is over. Attention is the real currency. Think of the person you'd claim to care about least right now, someone who hurt you, embarrassed you, disappointed you. Now ask yourself, do you know what they posted yesterday? What they said last week? Who they were seen with? If the answer comes quickly, that person is living somewhere inside your attention completely free of charge. And they may not even know the address. Attention is the one resource nobody can take from you by force. It can only be handed over. One replay, one imagined argument, one late-night scroll, one more check of a profile you already told yourself you were done checking. Getting it back doesn't require revenge. It doesn't require proving anything. It requires noticing the exact moment your mind wanders back to a scene that already finished and choosing to walk it back out again. That single habit, repeated enough times, changes more about a life than any single confrontation ever could. But getting your attention back creates another responsibility. What happens when someone still disagrees with you? The cost of making everything a referendum. Watch what happens to someone who treats every disagreement like a verdict on their worth. A coworker questions a decision, and suddenly it isn't about the decision anymore. It's about whether they're seen as competent, capable, worth keeping around. That person will spend enormous energy defending points that were never actually threatening them, because underneath, almost everything starts to feel threatening. There's a quieter way to hold a disagreement. You can think someone is wrong. Say so plainly. Set a boundary. Correct a lie. End a relationship that keeps costing more than it gives, and still not need the other person to concede before you feel steady once the conversation ends. Being right and being okay don't have to depend on each other. This is where people often misread Stoic calm as passivity. It isn't. Stoic calm doesn't mean you never act. It means your action isn't being dictated by the emotional demand to be validated. You stop needing the other person to agree with your version of events before you're permitted to feel settled. Their agreement was never actually load-bearing. It only felt that way because you had never tested what happens without it. And that brings you to the final layer, because even after you stop reacting to them, there's still one person you can secretly perform for. Yourself. Nobody left to perform for. Eventually, there's a harder question hiding underneath all of this. If the entire reason you're staying calm is to make someone notice how calm you've become, you haven't left the game. You've just switched which move you're making. Still watching. Still measuring whether it landed. Still hoping the silence eventually gets understood exactly the way you intended. The real shift happens somewhere quieter. It's the moment you realize you'd choose the same composure even if nobody ever found out about it, even if they never texted back to check, even if they never noticed you had changed at all. Epictetus taught from a position most people would call powerless, without property, without status, without control over almost anything happening around him. Yet he insisted that judgment was the one thing nobody could take. Not because it made him look strong to a crowd. Most days there wasn't a crowd watching at all. That's the actual finish line. Not becoming someone other people can't shake. Becoming someone who doesn't need an audience to confirm they weren't shaken in the first place. Because the moment your composure no longer needs to be witnessed, something changes. You stop trying to look magnetic, and you become magnetic as a consequence of no longer performing. When nothing needs performing. Imagine the version of you 6 months from now who has actually practiced this. Not perfectly. Nobody manages that, but often enough that it has become a pattern instead of an exception. Someone provokes you, you feel it rise, you notice it, and you let 3 seconds pass before deciding whether it deserves a response. Someone goes cold, you feel the old urge to chase. You let it move through you instead of driving your next message. Someone misunderstands you completely and tells a version of the story that isn't true, and you let them keep that version because correcting every misreading of yourself was never actually your job. None of that means you stop feeling things. You still feel anger. You still feel hurt. You still care. The difference is what happens next. The feeling arrives. It gets its honest moment, and then it hands the decision back to someone steady enough to make it. That's composure. That's self-command. And eventually, that's presence. The strongest person in the room is rarely the loudest one in it. More often, it's the one who can absorb an insult, a betrayal, or a long stretch of silence and still walk out of that room recognizably themselves. Nobody had to see it. Nobody had to applaud it. Nobody had to understand it, because the moment you stop needing your calm to be witnessed, you stop giving other people access to your identity. And that is where the real magnetism begins. So if that's the man you're choosing to become, write this below. I stay unshaken. Not because nothing can affect you, not because you never feel anger, not because you don't care, but because what you feel no longer gets to decide who you are. They can provoke you. They can misunderstand you. They can walk away. They can return. They can test the old version of you. And still, you remain yourself. No performance. No revenge. No need to prove that you weren't shaken. Just composure. Just self-command. Just the quiet certainty that your inner state belongs to you. I stay unshaken.